it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Arati Prabhakar, excuse me, the director of DARPA. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the future of the DoD's research. Thank you for joining us, Arati. So I believe we have a video that we'd like to start off with first.
Yeah,
correct?
I thought we'd kick off with some work that we've been doing at DARPA, just to dive right into it. The video you're going to see is a woman named Jan. One day, as she was in her home close to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, this is a woman who has been a quadriplegic for a number of years. She learned that the University of Pittsburgh was doing some research that where they were looking for volunteers to do something that was really breakthrough technology and a little bit crazy, and she volunteered to do it. And that project was the culmination of a DARPA program that had been underway for a number of years. That's a program called Revolutionizing Prosthetics, and it started when one of our program managers, who was an Army colonel at that time, and a medical doctor, he came back from deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, convinced that we had to find a better way to help our wounded warriors who had lost upper limbs. Mm-hmm. The standard of care for many decades has been this very simple hook. Jeff said there has to be a better way, and so he started a program that did two things. One was to develop a much more sophisticated prosthetic arm. The second thing was to understand motor signaling from the motor cortex, and then try to figure out how those signals actually control the arm. Jan volunteered to be part of an experiment where she was one of the very first people to have these small electrodes, sort of square centimeter size electrodes, placed on her motor cortex. You'll see in the video that she has 2 ports on top of her head, and from those ports, the researchers are able to pick up the electrical signaling from her motor cortex. What you'll see in this 60 Minutes video is what she's able to do after a few months. Let's go ahead and roll that.
Yep.
5 months after the surgery, we came back to see whether she would be able to control the robotic arm with nothing but her thoughts. They plugged her brain into the computer, and this is what we saw.
I can move it up and straight down and left and right and diagonally. I can close it and open it, and I can go forward and back.
That is just the most astounding thing I've ever seen. Can we shake hands?
Sure.
No, really?
Yeah.
Like, come right over here?
Yes, you come over there.
Okay.
Let me grasp your hand there. There we go.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
And I can do a fist bump if you'd like.
That's amazing.
So,
it's incredible.
Jan's amazing,
Yeah,
actually. He's right. He's absolutely
Yeah.
right. You know, the thing that, of course, this is a revolution in prosthetics for the future. We're very far from being able to do that in a simple way today. It's really just something that's an experiment. But, of course, in doing that, I think you can also see that we're opening this door to something that's not tomorrow, but out into the future. We can start imagining neurotechnologies that really fundamentally change the way humans interact with the world around them. So, just to kick off, that's one example.
That's a pretty good way to kick it off. So aside from performing what almost seems like miracles, I think for some people might not be intimately familiar with DARPA. So can you tell us just kind of why does DARPA exist? What do you guys
Sure, absolutely. In 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, and the United States was really surprised and taken aback by that. We didn't know that they were that close to being able to put the first satellite on orbit. And we did a lot of things in this country as a consequence of that surprise. One of them was to create, at that time, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. We later added the D for Defense. But we were created as part of the Defense Department out of a recognition that we needed a place whose day job was to think outside the box. And in addition to the work that we do for the Army and the Navy and the Air Force and the Marine Corps, within their science and technology investments, that we also needed a place that thought outside and beyond that. And so now we're in our 6th decade at DARPA of this mission of preventing technological surprise. But since the beginning, my predecessors quickly realized that the way you prevent technological surprises, you create a few surprises of your own. And so if you look at military systems like stealth aircraft and precision-guided munitions, you'll see a lot of DARPA core investments that made that possible. But a lot of the enabling technologies that we invested in over these decades, material science, the ARPANET, which became the internet, many, many different areas of information technology, computer science, electronics. We invested in those because we need them for national security systems. But of course, those technologies have also changed how we all live and work. And I can see that in our future portfolio as well, things that are DoD specific for the Defense Department, but also the work in neurotechnologies is a great example of something that can have much broader impact as well.
Right. And I know that I know a lot of people kind of associate robots, militarized technology with it, but there are definitely, there are 6 different technical offices, right, that kind of run the gamut. So can you talk a little bit about those offices and what they do and how you manage them?
Sure. We're a projects agency. The P in DARPA is projects, and so the way we manage all of our work is typically in programs that last 3 to 5 years. Along with that, our core staff, we're only 100 technical people who come to DARPA typically, again, for 3 to 5 years. And what they do in each of those programs is set an aggressive goal. In Jeff's case, Jeff Ling said, let's figure out if we can have direct neural control of a prosthetic. Other programs sometimes are about an advanced military system, an aircraft or a missile or a new kind of autonomous ship, as an example. Sometimes it'll be demonstrating new big data tools or cybersecurity. So whatever your area is, those program managers set that aggressive goal, and then we don't do the work with just 100 people. Our funds go out into universities and companies, large companies, small companies, defense contractors, commercial companies, labs of all different sorts. And that's the community that we build, but also that's the place where the great breakthroughs come from for all of our work.
So I know for a brief time before you came, well, maybe not brief, but for a time before you came to DARPA, I know you worked at an investment firm,
at a venture capital firm.
So how, and that seems to be sort of, I'm sure it's different, but that's sort of what you're doing now. And how do you keep up with, how do you choose the projects to invest in?
Right. First of all, venture capital and what we do at DARPA. Our mission at DARPA is to invest in technologies and make those happen. We're not in the business of building products and building companies. And venture, of course, is purely about building great companies. Right. So they share the characteristic that you're working with. It's wonderful to work in this unbounded way with all these incredibly smart people, but the fundamental objectives, I think, are different and complementary. So, it's just, they're a little different. How do we pick? We are informed by the challenges of national security and then inspired by what technology can do. And we really live at the nexus of those two things. So today we worry about not just the future military capabilities of nation states. What's Russia going to do? Where will China's ambitions take it? What's going on with Iran and North Korea? Those are the traditional questions that have shaped national security. They're still important. Today we also worry about terrorism and violent extremism, how it's linked to criminal activity across the world, often, again, linked back to nation states. Right. So that fluid environment, all empowered by exactly the kinds of technologies that you see here, which we're all pursuing for good reasons, but of course can be used for bad reasons as well. That's the bubbling pot of problems that's on our plate. And then when we look at technology, we are, first you get very depressed when you think about all those problems. But, we're technologists, and so we find great opportunity and actually great excitement about what can be done with the advances in information technology, the convergence of information technology with the kinds of broad innovation that can reach a lot of people today. Examples like neurotechnologies, where biology is coming into the picture in some really new ways, and we pick by looking for the most exciting opportunities at that intersection. So speaking of biotech and
that we were speaking a little bit about this backstage, and I know particularly here in New York, but everywhere, we've recently had, there was the Ebola scare, of course, that's been in the news, and you guys are working on some Ebola-related projects. So can you talk a little bit about what you're doing there?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's, New York scrambled and dealt, I think, very effectively with the situation it had, but of course, thousands of people are still infected, and we've had thousands of deaths in West Africa. Just to step back from the specific situation with Ebola, a few years ago at DARPA, we started working on a question about infectious disease. Our work was out of a realization that we've all seen it, right? I mean, before Ebola, there was Middle East respiratory syndrome. There are various mosquito-borne diseases that pop up and flare up. We all remember H1N1 from a few years ago. This is part of modern life, is that infectious diseases flare up. Global travel means that they're going to not stay put. They're going to go wherever people go, and that's everywhere. And when we looked ahead to what synthetic biology is going to let people do in the future, again, amazing good things are going to come out of that, but it's also going to give bad actors a tool that they don't have yet. And so our question was, given all of those problems, naturally occurring and potentially human engineered, what could we do to outpace the spread of infectious disease? And so we've had a program underway for a few years that tries to develop very cheap point-of-care diagnostics. So instead of, taking a sample and putting it in a cold chain and refrigerating it and sending it to a lab and waiting a few days to find out which virus this person's been exposed to, can it be a paper strip test like a pregnancy test? Wouldn't that be awesome? And we're making some progress towards that. On the therapeutic and protection side, we started working on some radical new ideas to make vaccines better, but maybe to come up as well with techniques that would give you immediate protection. Every time we get a flu vaccine, we all know it can take a week or weeks before it starts giving us protection, because it takes that long to trigger your own body's immune system.
Right.
And so we've been working on some techniques that we think could short circuit that by figuring out what those protective antibodies are. For example, in the Ebola case, we're starting with the antibodies from some of the survivors, and then we're figuring out what the RNA sequences are and the DNA sequences are that if you had those would tell a cell to make those antibodies directly. And we're just at the beginning stages, but we're hoping to see if we can accelerate that kind of work so that if Ebola continues to be spiraling forward in the next year, we'll have one more technique in addition to the other things that are being pursued. I hope Ebola is going to get solved before then,
right.
But we also know that the next thing is coming, and so we're building a platform that I hope will give us a much faster response next time.
So another kind of set of projects that you guys work on that's of very high interest to me personally, and I think to a lot of Engadget folks and readers, is the space programs.
Yeah.
You are developing a
there.
wide range of things there. Can you talk a little bit about some of the highlights? I know you're the Airborne Launch Assist Space Access program. I think there's space planes you guys are working on. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, all of our work in space begins with the recognition that, first of all, the things that we need for national security are critically reliant on space. First and foremost, GPS. I don't know about you guys, I'm addicted to the little blue dot on my smartphone. I sort of can't get anywhere without it. It turns out to be critically important for our warfighters, wherever they are, for them to be able to know their position and the time with great precision and accuracy is like oxygen for everything they do. That is something that is, where we're very reliant on space. It's also something we rely on for communications and surveillance. It's critical to how we fight today. But it's a very expensive domain to operate in, and every new thing that we want to do on orbit involves building these seemingly massive, expensive satellites every time. It can take years to schedule launch, and those launches are very expensive. They only go from a few fixed sites around the world. So, that really isn't going to hack it for the world that we're facing coming up. And so we've been trying to rethink that entire space architecture. One piece of it many people have been working on shrinking satellites, and with the advances in microelectronics and new algorithms and computing, what you can do in a really small satellite now is pretty amazing compared to the old days. So we said, can we couple with that the ability to put very small satellites on orbit for far less cost, but even more importantly, can we figure out a way to do it where you could have launch, you could call up a launch in 24 hours instead of 24 months. That would make a difference.
Right.
So one of our programs, ALASA, is specifically building the technology that would allow a conventional military aircraft to take a satellite to high enough orbit that it could then launch and boost itself to a low Earth orbit. That program aims to be able to put a 100-pound satellite on low Earth orbit for $1 million. As an example. And then a second program you mentioned is our spaceplane program. That's a reusable first stage. There'd be an unmanned vehicle that would, again, be able to take a more modest sized satellite. In this case, we're not at 100 pounds. Now we're going to go to about 3,000 pounds, where you can really start getting some substantial capability. So these mid-size satellites, and we think we aim to be able to do that. Again, 24-hour call-up, but maybe for $3 to $5 million to get that kind of a spaceship on, that kind of a satellite on orbit.
So we've kind of covered, I think, a fairly wide range, and that only gives people kind of a very small window into the vast number of projects that you are in charge of. So that kind of begs the question for me: how do you keep up with all of the projects and make sure you're choosing the right ones and investing in the right places?
DARPA's work is very much a portfolio. We've been talking about a lot of the different pieces of it. At the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is getting people that can understand our mission, that understand the technology, that have the personal characteristics that allow them to energize the community and make something great happen, to figure out where these big opportunities are. And so every story I've told you today came out of program managers at DARPA saying, here's a problem, but here's a solution that might be radically better, and let's go see if we can make that happen. We are always recruiting those people. They tend to come out of the same places that we work with. Sometimes it's a university professor who takes leave and comes and works with us for a few years. It can be someone who's worked at a company, an entrepreneur or someone from a larger company. It can be someone from another part of government, but we need those people with that crazy spark and the drive, and if you have that, you can make anything happen.
Right. And I know that we said that you have to love all of your children, but I know that there are some of these projects that are very exciting, that are kind of burgeoning, and we were talking about that. So what is your kind of, if you could choose one, or at least one to watch, which one is that? Which area?
Well, I think we've talked about a lot of them.
Yep.
Biology intersecting with technology is going to be huge.
Yep.
We've talked about rethinking complex systems. These are all children I love a lot, to be clear. Let me just mention one more that I think will resonate with some of the things that are going on outside of the national security world. That has to do with what's happening with big data. I think we're all seeing the explosion of information that's going on. All the things that are happening in the rest of this hall are going to increase that explosion even more. And a lot of companies in the private sector, of course, are building amazing businesses by harvesting insight from that data. What we found in the national security context is that despite all of that work, there are problems that we have that are not getting tackled. One of them, is a great example, is we talked to people in law enforcement who were working on trying to trace human trafficking networks. And what we found was that they searched through trafficking ads or services ads the same way you or I would go on Google or Bing, sort of this single-threaded search through this seemingly infinite environment. And it's a very long, slow, painful way to go. Very, very arduous to make any sense of all of that. We developed some tools to do domain-specific deep web search to look into the parts of the web that are not indexed by Google or Bing or other commercial services, but in very specific areas. And from that, in a particular geographic region, we looked at sex services ads, and we were able to build a network map. and show the linkages. Certain phone numbers showed up over and over and over again in these ads. And we said, well, that might not be a coincidence. We took these phone numbers. Again, this is from ads, right? It's the most public information that's out there. We scooped up 600 phone numbers that were the most highly linked in that arena. We sent it over the fence to our law enforcement partners, and they were really taken aback. They said, where did you get these numbers? Because when we compared them to our arduously built, years of legwork database, they found that those numbers tied to over 400 known criminal violations, some fairly horrific crimes. And perhaps even more significantly, they found among those numbers that tied to 30 fund transfers in the regions around North Korea. And now they are on the trail of some of these trafficking networks that are a part of this vast sex services environment that's publicly available and online. So, a great example, I think, of the kind of value in big data that lots of people are finding in the private sector, but in our world, we have some other problems, and I think there's the opportunity to build amazing new capabilities there as well.
And having immediate positive impact on the world too.
That's a really good feeling, and that's a I think it's hard to think of a more dreadful thing that goes on in our society.
Right.
And I know our program manager, Chris White, he's a man on fire because he really cares about making an impact on those kinds of problems.
Right on. Well, I think that's about all the time that we have left. So thank you very much,
Thanks for having
Dr.
me.
Prabhakar.
Great to be
and
here.
thanks. Stick around. We've got some more coming for you.